Thank you for the nice introduction. Good morning, and first I need to apologize. I need to give this presentation in English as my French is really, really bad, and I can't do it in French, I'm sorry. So also thank you for giving me the opportunity to present our work here. Iron deficiency with or without anemia is a major public health problem worldwide, especially in young women. And we have seen this map already this morning, and it nicely shows that iron deficiency anemia is not only prevalent in the developing countries, but actually also in the Western countries. In fact, iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency in the world, affecting over 2 billion people. And the most vulnerable groups are children, women of reproductive age, and pregnant women. As those groups, they have increased iron requirements due to rapid growth, menstrual blood losses, and the iron requirement of the fetus. Causes for iron deficiency in non-industrialized countries are poor iron intake and parasitic infection. In industrialized countries, however, vegetarian dietary choices and poor iron absorption and chronic blood loss are the main causes for iron deficiency. So what are the strategies to improve a population's iron status? It's dietary diversification, food fortification, and iron supplementation. And in this presentation, I'll mainly focus, obviously, on the food fortification. Food fortification can lead to a relatively rapid improvement in the macronutrient status of a population, actually at a very reasonable cost. And the obvious requirements are that fortified food needs to be consumed in an adequate amount by the target population, and the used fortificant needs to be well absorbed and should not affect the sensory properties of the food. Iron is technically very challenging, a very challenging macronutrient to add to foods, as the compounds with the highest bioavailability also produce the most organoleptic changes. These are some examples for iron compounds for food fortification, and as we already heard this morning, they can basically put into three groups. We have the water-soluble iron compounds. The best example is ferrous sulfate. It has the highest bioavailability, and therefore it's also the most used iron compound. It's the cheapest, but it also has, or it shows organoleptic changes. Then we have the ferrous fumarate as an example for the poorly water-soluble compounds, but it's soluble in dilute acid. And this makes it even as bioavailable as ferrous sulfate, as it's dissolved in the gastric tract, but it has less organoleptic changes compared to ferrous sulfate. And then we have the insoluble in water and also insoluble in dilute acid, so the elemental iron, so there the bioavailability actually ranges from 20 to 75%, as it's very dependent on the production, and costs are relatively low, and also sensory changes are not that big. However, all these compounds, they're really affected by the dietary composition. So the bioavailability of an iron compound for fortification is dependent not only on its solubility, but also on the composition of the diet, so the iron-binding phytates and polyphenols. So this moves us to the iron fortificant EDTA, which is highly bioavailable. It is a chelating agent, so it is less affected by dietary iron inhibitors. This has been shown with phytic acid. This means it competes with the iron inhibitors for the iron binding. Then in high phytate foods, iron EDTA has been shown to increase iron absorption 2 to 3 times compared to ferrous sulfate, and it is stable during process and storage, and it causes less organoleptic changes. While the negative points are that it is relatively expensive compared to ferrous sulfate, and it is slowly soluble in water, so it may still cause some color changes in some foods. these are some examples for iron-rich foods. We have the red meat, which is high in heme iron. Then we have legumes, the green vegetables, eggs, dried fruits. These are only some examples, but the extent to which non-heme iron is absorbed from the diet is influenced by the composition of the diet and not only by the amount of iron it's in the diet. Phytates and polyphenols are potent inhibitors of dietary iron absorption. So we have the phytates, which are present in plant-based diets, and their inhibitory effect on fractional iron absorption has been shown to be dose-dependent. So a molar ratio of phytate to iron should be below 1:1, or preferably below 0.4:1 to improve the iron status. Then we have the polyphenols, which are present in vegetables, fruit, some cereals and legumes, coffee, wine, and tea. Polyphenols have antioxidant properties, and also their effect on iron absorption is actually dose-dependent and also type-dependent. As polyphenols, there are many different types of polyphenols, some containing the galore groups, and some having the catechol groups, and the galore groups actually, they have faster oxidation rates than the catechol groups. Well, there are not only iron absorption inhibitors in the diet, there are also iron absorption enhancers, and one of the best examples for that is probably vitamin C. So iron is absorbed from the diet in the gastrointestinal tract, and dietary iron is mostly present as non-heme iron in the dietary tract, so as iron 3+. So as iron enters the gastrointestinal tract, it first needs to be reduced by this reductase before it can be taken up by the divalent metal transporter 1. As this name already says, it can transport divalent metals. So iron 3+ needs to be reduced to iron 2+, then it's taken up by the transporter, and in the cell, in the enterocyte, it can be either stored or it can be released into circulation through ferroportin, where it's then bound to transferrin and transported to the organs. So the limiting factor seems that for non-heme iron absorption is also this reductase, which first needs to reduce iron 3+ to iron 2+. And exactly that's what also vitamin C does. It reduces iron 3+ to iron 2+ in the gastrointestinal tract, making it more available for iron uptake. And in addition, it also chelates iron, making it unavailable for the binding of polyphenols. So it also competes with the iron absorption inhibitors. Now coming to EDTA, it has been shown that EDTA increases iron absorption in diets which are high in phytic acid. And a good example for that is this Egypt bread, which contains a lot of high extraction wheat flour. So this means it contains a lot of phytic acid. And in this study, they showed that the addition of iron sulfate was, here iron absorption was much more decreased than with iron EDTA, as exactly what, as I said before, iron EDTA has a positive effect if the diet is high in phytic acid. And the same was shown here, a publication from Herald. The same was shown here, that in diets which contain a lot of phytic acid, EDTA improves iron absorption compared to the iron compounds sulfate and ferrous fumarate. So the objectives from our study we did here in Rabat were that assessing the effectiveness of iron EDTA in overcoming the inhibitory effects of polyphenols present in Moroccan tea on iron absorption, and our hypothesis was that EDTA will be less inhibited by polyphenols present in Moroccan tea compared to elemental iron or ferrous sulfate, but will not overcome their inhibitory effect. So I will explain the method again very briefly. We have the stable isotopes, which are present everywhere in nature, so they have all a natural abundance. And iron 56 has the highest natural abundance, so it's present in the whole body. The participants, they consume the test meal, which was composed of brioche. I will come to that later again. And with that test meal, they consumed these stable iron isotopes. And then, 2 weeks after they consumed the stable iron isotopes, we took a blood sample, and we measured the shift in the enrichment ratios of the 57 and 58 into the natural 56 in the red blood cells. This was our study design. So we included 48 women, 24 non-anemic and 24 anemic women. We took a blood sample, so a baseline blood sample to measure their iron status parameters. Then we gave them a test meal without tea, a test meal with tea, or the other way around. And 14 days later, we then measured the iron incorporation, so the iron absorption. And the test meal was a wheat flour brioche with water, fortified with 6 milligrams labeled as, with 6 milligrams iron as EDTA, given either with or without tea. And the inclusion criteria for the women were, they had to be between 18 and 49 years, a normal BMI below 70 kilograms, either non-anemic or anemic, not pregnant or lactating, and no chronic disease, no smoking, and no inflammation. So this slide shows the baseline characteristics of the women. I separated them, so here we have the total study population, we have them, and then we have them separated into non-anemic and anemic. They were about 25 years, normal BMI, then hemoglobin was about 13.1, or the mean was 13.1 grams per deciliter in the non-anemic, and 11.1 in the anemic, with ferritins of 24 and 6. And they had no inflammation. Then analysis of the test meal. The test meal was composed of 2 brioche, which were about 30 grams, and then tea, 100 milliliters of tea, some butter and honey. And the analysis of the test meal showed that the meal itself almost did not contain any iron. Phytic acid content was really low, was only about 6 milligrams, and the polyphenols, they were present in the tea with 164 milligrams. So this shows very low iron and phytic acid contents, and this means that the iron absorbed came from the labeled 6 milligrams EDTA, and the inhibition in iron absorption was actually due to the polyphenols and not to the phytic acid, which was very, very low. So our results showed that the consumption of tea with the meal resulted in an almost 90% decrease in fractional iron absorption over the whole study population. And this decrease was obviously significant. Then we split this analysis into non-anemic in blue and anemic women in white, again without tea and with tea, and we saw an equal inhibitory effect of tea on fractional iron absorption in anemic and non-anemic women. And both without tea and with tea, the fractional iron absorption in women with iron deficiency anemia was about 2.5-fold higher compared to the non-anemic women. So, to put these results in relation, the daily iron requirements for women are about 1.5 milligrams. So a woman should take, or should absorb about 1.5 milligrams iron from the diet per day. So in the meal without tea, we see that the non-anemic women cover about 53%, and the anemic women even 130% of the daily iron requirements from a test meal or from a meal from brioche fortified or with an added 6 milligrams of iron. This is actually pretty good. And with tea, we have the 4% absorbed in the anemic group, and even then, they absorbed about, the total iron absorption was 0.45 milligrams, so assuming 3 meals a day, they would absorb in total 0.72 milligrams, even with tea. And our results are actually in agreement with the study published in 2008. This study showed the inhibitory effect of T and the enhancing effect of vitamin C were similar in anemic and non-anemic women. And in this study, 10 anemic and non-anemic women, they received a test meal with either 1 or 2 cups of black tea, and a test meal with either vitamin C in a molar ratio to iron 2:1 or 4:1. So the study showed first the same as we saw, that fractional iron absorption was about 2.5 times greater in the iron deficiency anemia group. And then it showed that the consumption of 1 or 2 cups of tea decreased iron absorption into controls, so in the non-anemic, by 49% or 66%, and in iron deficiency anemia by 59% or 67%. So this suggests that the inhibitory effect of polyphenols on iron absorption is dose-dependent. Then the addition of vitamin C increased iron absorption by 270% or 343% in the controls, and by 291 and 350% in the iron deficiency anemia group. And then this study, published last year in the Journal of American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, is actually very interesting. And here they gave to 12 women, so they were non-anemic and iron sufficient, a standardized diet and labeled with 4 milligrams of iron sulfate. And they consumed this diet either with water, with black tea simultaneously, so at the same time, or with black tea 1 hour after the meal. And they showed that this 1 hour interval between the meal and the tea consumption attenuates the inhibitory effect of polyphenols. So there was a 35% reduction in fractional iron absorption when a test meal was given simultaneously with tea compared with the test meal with water, and fractional iron absorption was about 2.2% higher when the tea was given 1 hour after a test meal than when the tea was given simultaneously with the tea, the meal with the tea. So, to conclude, our study showed that women with iron deficiency anemia absorb about 2.5 times more iron than non-anemic women. Iron absorption was highly dependent on the subject's iron status, and in women with iron deficiency anemia, still about 17% of the required 1.5 milligrams iron per day would be covered with 1 meal consumed with tea. The inhibitory effect of polyphenols was similar in women with iron deficiency anemia and non-anemic women. So this suggests that iron deficiency anemia cannot overcome the inhibitory effects of polyphenols present in the Moroccan tea. Now, the literature showed that the addition of vitamin C to a meal could actually be beneficial, as the effect of vitamin C on iron absorption inhibitors seems to be stronger than the effect of from EDTA. And the inhibitory effect of polyphenols was shown to be dose-dependent, as reducing the amount of cups of tea with the meal could be beneficial. And instead of consuming tea simultaneously with the meal, it could be also helpful to consider having tea only 1 hour after the meal. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank Professor Agnew and Professor Amina Barkat. I would like to thank Michael Zimmerman, Cornelia Löchel, and Dr. Laila El Amari. Thank you very much.